From an early age, I had a strong and personal interest in business. And when I mean early age, I was probably 8 or 9 years old when my grandmother, who had a chicken ranch, chicken farm, she would end up with extra eggs. And so the arrangement we had was that I could put the eggs in my wagon and go around to the neighbors, and whatever I sold the eggs for, I got to keep half. So essentially, at the age of 8 years old, I ran a distribution company.
So I went to Yale University in New Haven and graduated in May of '84. I was a history major with a particular interest on Soviet history, which you may have noticed doesn't exist anymore, and concluded that what I wanted was a small consulting firm on the West Coast that dealt with technology. This is now 1987, so PCs have been out for a little while. The Mac is out, or actually the Mac isn't out, but Lisa is out. There's clearly a profound shift going on in technology in American demography. So I ran down to the career office at Yale, where I had, alumni rights. And there's a letter from this guy, Jeff Weber, that says, I run a 20-person technology consulting firm in Palo Alto, and I'd like to hire Yale grads. And I called him up and said, yes, and Yale's paying my way to San Francisco next week. How about I come talk to you?
In terms of a career, I and almost anybody who knew me growing up assumed I would be a lawyer. And I can remember sitting on a hillside in Auckland, New Zealand on my 21st birthday. And I thought about what lawyers do, and I thought about what I like to do, and there was absolutely no overlap. My passion then and now was in business, and so upon graduation I elected to take a job with probably one of the world's largest and finest consulting firms, management consulting firms, which truly launched me on my path as a problem solver and ultimately as an investor.
I'm in Palo Alto in spring of '87. I'm 24 years old. And the firm that Jeff was running, the consulting firm that Jeff was running at the time, set up a full day of interviews for me. I'm 6 or 8 hours into this. We've interviewed, we've done case studies, we've gone to lunch, we've done some chatting. And I get shown back to the lobby and said, okay, your last interview of the day is going to be with Jeff. So it's 4 o'clock and I'm kind of tired by now. And I'm finally going to meet the big boss. And he's got a round table kind of like this in his office. And where actually he did all his work, the desk was, as I learned later, the desk was kind of the twilight zone where things went to die. But I walk in and he's clearly got my resume. If you've seen Jeff, his vision isn't great, and so he does this. And I've never met him before, and he's looking at me and shaking his head, and looking at me and shaking his head. And the first words Jeff Weber ever directed at me were he put my resume down and said, so, why should I give a job to a guy who's done squishy shit all his life? And I went, and I'm not even sure what I said in response. And I might just say it wasn't my strongest interview of my life, but I remember driving away from Jeff's office back up to the city thinking, wow, that guy's a jerk, but I bet he'd be really interesting to work for.
When I started my career, the basis was at McKinsey was learning about the business, the client, the situation, and answering one or more strategic questions. As I continued and was accepted at Stanford Business School, what I learned after 6 weeks was I had very little interest in going back to large corporate environments. I didn't really enjoy the financial aspects, the purely financial aspects of a business, or a business like investment banking. So around Thanksgiving, I decided to drop out of business school and start my own company. It was called New Venture Consultants, and I never looked back.
In the fall of 1990, the firm that Jeff ran that I was part of was acquired. Jeff said, "So what are you going to do next year?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm going to go to business school." And he said, "You don't want to do that, really, do you?" And I said, "No, not really, but I don't know what else to do." He said, "Well, go do something for the fall, and come back and find me, sometime after Halloween." And then Jeff and 4 other people and I opened the door on the firm R.B. Weber and Company. And while my age cohorts were, learning how to run Excel and reading case studies, I was working with John Warnock, the founder of Adobe. I was working with Al Eisenstadt, who ran Apple Ventures. I was working with Mark Hoffman and Bob Epstein, who founded Sybase. And it was the most extraordinary education in business I can imagine. And I wouldn't have gotten anything like that going to business school. So that's kind of my version of it. I think Jeff was at Stanford B School, basically 10 years before what I just told you about, and got frustrated. He's got a mind that jumps in all kinds of different directions, and graduate programs want you to go more or less in their direction. And I don't think that was probably oil and vinegar.
So one of the things I like most about Jeff, and I've known him now for 22 years, is his ability to maintain his sense of humor at any particular moment, whether a company of his is in crisis, whether a company of his is doing great. He is the same guy that you'd sit down to have a beer with at a local bar, and he'd be the same guy telling jokes at the bar as the same guy telling jokes in the board meeting.
Probably the strongest trade, so to speak, the strongest skill that I learned that's applicable was writing. And I write every day. I write all the time. It's a huge part of my job in terms of communication with my entrepreneurs.
Oh, it was late 2001. The bubble hadn't burst yet, and it just felt like it was time to do something else. I think it's revealing that I did one startup that was just a catastrophe. And then when I got back into another startup that actually raised money, my first call was Jeff. And I went back and said, I don't care how much money you have. I want you involved. I want you on the board. I want your help with this. And we've, different terms, but we've been back in business together ever since.
One of my favorite stories about Jeff, so I pull into a board meeting a couple of years ago, and as I pull into the parking lot, here's Jeff pulling in his pickup truck. And as I walk towards him now, because I figure we'll walk into the building together, I round the truck, and here's this guy who has his shirt off, and he's changing shirts. So he's taken off this Aloha shirt that he's been driving down to the board meeting in, and he's putting on some sort of fancier shirt to go into the board meeting. And besides the fact that you have this image of a 50-something-year-old, relatively heavy set, not particularly well-tanned body, changing shirts in the middle of a parking lot, going into a technology company building for a board meeting, you had the immediate humor of, here's a guy that if you ran into him on any given day, he's wearing shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt or an Aloha shirt. He doesn't ever think about what he's wearing. Like, he never dresses up. He's just casual that way. And it triggered this uproarious laughter about, that is an image I hope I never see again. And when we went into the board meeting, he was pretty candid telling the story about how he's just out in the parking lot changing shirts. That's the quintessence of him. It's his sense of humor.
During graduation, it might have been a clue that my colleagues elected me to be the most successful of our group and provided me with a cigar as part of my award. My choice of major in college was made independently of what I thought I'd do in my career. And I would encourage any young person to follow your heart in terms of your studies in college. I was an American Studies major, attended a liberal arts college, but really college is to teach you how to learn. And if you have that skill, you can tackle almost any profession of your choice.